Well, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Very big thank you to Lucy Reynolds, who agreed obviously to take part in this conversation with Sarah. Just a few little things. I think the talk will be about 30 to 40 minutes. Then obviously questions whoever would like to ask any. Then we can continue with tea and cake, and you can continue the conversation with the artists, with Lucy, or between yourself in the surrounding of the gallery. And also the film is still on, and if you haven't seen it properly or want to see it again, please do so. So thank you very much.
Well, I should also say thank you, Sarah, for giving me the excuse to be able to write this, because I know that you've been working on this film for a long time, or in a sense on this subject, but I also know that Bresson is someone who's really helped you through this. And I wondered how many people have known the film. I'm presuming many of you do, but I know Bresson's work as, I guess, really part of that modernist tradition of post-war French cinema, but a generation before Godard and others. But somebody who really, I'm sure again many of you have your thoughts about his very profound expressions of faith, but also of a certain way of working with actors. We can hear the Schubert upstairs, but working with music and working with a kind of what was known as a kind of what a sort of elliptical style of never directly picturing, lots of close-up shots rather than establishing shots or medium shots. And I mean, it seems that Bresson's someone that you've been looking at and that chimes with your own work very much for many years. But in a sense, I also am aware that here is perhaps you've used a form of quotation in some sense, quite directly, of parts of his film Oh Hasard Balthazar, which he made in 1966. So I wondered if we might just start there, and you just to talk through the importance of Bresson and the importance of Bresson in terms of the narrative that you're telling here.
Yes. So, well, first of all, I'd just like to say, although Bresson was really important to how I came to the subject, and for this particular subject, and actually you were very helpful in saying that it was almost, because I've been thinking about making a film about this subject for a long time, and thinking coming to it through Bresson was a way for me to approach a very difficult area. But what I'd say is you also don't have to know Bresson to get the work, and I think that's important. And in fact, I think in the UK, lots of people don't really know Bresson unless they're film people. But
maybe this will encourage people who don't to now go and watch.
Yeah, but the films that he's mainly known for is like Pickpocket is the big one, and which people might know, and then I'm trying to think.
Diary of a Country Parson, is it?
Country Priest.
Or,
yeah. But and then there's another film, Mouchette, which you might come across, which is very close to the time of the making of Hasard Balthazar.
And you often saw them as paired a bit, didn't you?
Yes, I mean they are very connected, I think. Anyway, well, I first came to Bresson through. I've made a film in 2006 for Kettle's Yard, and it was called Model 280. And the film editor that I was working on with that said, you have to look at some Bresson, and I wasn't familiar at all, actually. Probably because of the way that I was working with actors. So then I sort of got to know more about Bresson. And Bresson, like I did, always worked with, or often worked with non-professional actors. And the process of the rehearsal was very intense in my work and in Bresson's work. She saw that parallel, and so that sense of them performing kind of fell away, and so they actually kind of got bored of the kind of performance, the idea of performance. So then something else happens as a result. and I think you end up in quite an interior portrayal of the protagonist. So you see things from the inside rather than from the outside. Performance is all about the outside.
So very often, I think there's
Yeah.
a sense with his work that something is happening, quite momentous things happening off screen,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
what you're looking at is a really beautifully framed detail or something else, but you're
Yes.
hearing it, and that sense of a kind of implication of a drama or narrative without but what you're looking at being visually quite minimal is something I think that's always been part of your work. to some
Yeah.
extent.
So, I mean, I guess he does this sense, he achieves this sense of making the viewer connect with the inner lives of the characters through the use of like close-up, through the use of inner monologue sometimes, letter writing, and heightened use of sound. And so, that really connected for me in terms of what I was interested in doing in my work. So I became a bit of a uber fan of Bresson. And,
No bad thing.
and but obviously I'm sort of coming to the territory from a very different perspective, because he was quite concerned with faith, and I haven't been engaged with that. I've been more thinking about sort of social context. So most of all, I think it was the way that in the stories that figure in his films, the protagonists are often depicted in circumstances that they don't control. And so, in a way that they are portrayals of situations rather than characters. So it's the opposite from Hollywood kind of scenario treatment of character, where the character will often steer the narrative that they're seen in. In Bresson's films, the subjects are sort of exposed to sort of forces that are beyond their control. And that's, I guess, why it made this connection in terms of this story and this historical account, why it sort of seemed like a natural way to approach the subject matter.
Yeah, no, I was going to say go on, Karen, because I think I guess a question I might have was exactly why this particular film.
Mm-hmm.
Why did this feel that it as a way in to a subject which is enormous, at the same time that it's there's a personal dimension to it from your family history, but it's also extremely timely. I know that, and we'll come to that in a minute, I know that was your feeling, that whilst on one hand you were exploring it through discussions with your family, at the same time you were looking at its resonances in the current situation. So perhaps you could say a little bit more about that in relation to this particular film of Bresson's.
So I guess how I came to this particular film is it's kind of referred to at the beginning of the film, where it says, though the pictures don't illustrate the words, their connection comes from the place where the memoir began. So the memoir, the family memoir, began in a sort of piece of common land near their house in Budapest, in fact, and it was a place that was called locally the Donkey Field. So there weren't any donkeys there, but historically that was it must have been used for that. And it was a place where children played, and that had to be crossed to get to school every day. And so it was there that there was this anti-Semitic attack, through which there was a discovery of my family members' Jewish identity that they didn't know, because it had been hidden from them, because his parents, thought that by hiding that identity from him, it would protect him from the anti-Semitism that they knew was rising. And in fact, I mean, it was a very strong way to start the memoir, because obviously he had grown up with surrounded by anti-Semitic propaganda. So he was devastated when he found out. Yeah. So that the end of that account, the last line of that section just ended with, "And so the pain began."
Yeah.
So that really stuck with me, and the name of the donkey field. And then it made this connection to the Bresson film, which is really a film that, to me, it's like a cinematic allegory about the victimization of innocent subjects, using this kind of figure of the donkey.
Who's mute. I think there's something very interesting about the kind of non-human protagonist that the donkey is at the heart of it.
Yeah.
But he makes extraordinary use in the film of its eyes, the sense that it's somehow, all these things are being thrown at it and it's got no way to come back. It doesn't know how to come back. It doesn't, almost it doesn't understand. And I thought, well, I guess the question really I have is, was that in a sense something that you wanted to reflect in your film? The sense of not having a way to get them to come back.
You mean not having a voice?
Yeah.
Yes, because this is a childhood memoir, so it's the experience of a child at age 10. So a child who experiences, who witnesses, but who doesn't really have the capacity to speak like an adult can. So that was important.
Maybe you could say a little bit about the way that you use, and again something which I've always loved in work is the way that you use actors, but they're like Bresson, there's a use of a gesture as a kind of pared down sense of movement in them. And when we were just watching it again, I thought there was that moment when the girl leads the donkey out of, I think of a barn.
Yes.
And that's our first meeting with her. And of course the girl in Hazar Balthazar is quite a key figure who's very much associated to the donkey. But I think what I liked about the way that you've quoted from Bresson, I mean, this is a girl in the film, and you've, so if you know the film, you can quite clearly see that narrative. But you're talking about, you're talking about a young boy. So all the time you're reminding us, look, this isn't exact.
Yeah.
But there's something shared here. And so maybe you could just talk a little bit more about how you came to sort of make the film, or think through the form of the film, even the way that you use the text, which doesn't work in relation to the images.
Yes, so I guess the film focuses in on my film focuses in on several specific scenes from Hazar Balthazar. So there's I guess the beginning where you sort of establish that the donkey is sort of being hunted by the boys, and then there's the which goes up to where he sort of meets the girl and goes into the stable, and then there is the bit in the night garden scene
When she's putting the flowers on.
And then there's and then the bar scene. Those three scenes very specifically refer to Bresson. But obviously I'm repurposing it. So I did actually reconstruct those scenes kind of very accurately, although not observing, I didn't want it to look like it was set in the 1960s. I didn't want it to look, I didn't want it to be...
This brings me to another point. I'll let you finish this one. But,
so I didn't want to, ape the look of Bresson's films, but it was more of a kind of internal structural approach to using those scenes, and so those were key bits. And then I suppose there were key bits in the memoir. So there's one key bit where he finds out he's Jewish, and he denies it actually, and is sure that it's not true. But then the events that follow really quickly are, being forced out of the family home into a designated house, which was actually a yellow star house. So Budapest had this phenomena of the yellow star house. And then there's a key scene for me in the memoir, which is the march down the hill where they are, I think, being marched towards the train station for deportation, but then something goes wrong. But that march where they are being watched by people. So I sort of worked in a kind of tangential way between these scenes and the scenes from Bresson and the text, and made these kind of, I guess, there's sort of lyrical relationships between these passages. It's quite hard to put into words.
You've done very well. And I think that lyrical relationships are a very nice way to put it. And in a way, it feels like the subject that you want to address, if you can call it the subject, the traumas, the persecution that you want to address, he allowed you to find a way into, but actually to find a way to structure how you might look at transforming something which comes from a personal, family personal experience, how to open that up to be something which has a reading for all sorts of other situations. And I think the thing I got quite excited thinking about when I was writing your piece was this idea of what Deleuze calls the any space whatever idea that you've got, which you do so carefully with your staging and your mise en scène, that people in it both refer to the Hungarian persecutions of the 1930s in the clothes, but at the same time, something about his leather jacket seems to be of Bresson's 1960s, and yet there's the graffiti. So in the sense you're saying this is sort of out of time, but it's a contemporary time. I'm not hiding this, but at the same time, I'm also alluding through the staging, through the costumes that they're wearing, the clothes that they're wearing, the music that I'm using, to other times, to be able to say, in a sense, this is something that is going on right now around the world, and I know that this was important to you.
So I think I really wouldn't have probably made the film if it hadn't been for the refugee crisis and probably Brexit as well. So the two things coming together, and as a kind of, descendant of someone who came to the UK from those, from a situation of persecution, then that sort of resonated in a particular way for me. And then also, I felt like the reporting of the refugee crisis, there was this historical echo of what happened to Jews in the Second World War. So I really wanted to look outwards from that story, that's quite particular, but look outwards and see the kind of connection to other stories of persecution. And ones that are happening right now. And I think the fact that, unfortunately, in Hungary, the refugees from Afghanistan and Syria were actually treated inhumanely, and they were sort of corralled at a station in Budapest, and they were told that the train was going to Munich, and it wasn't. It was going to a camp in the middle of and the reporting of that was, the echoes were so strong. So I really wanted to sort of make those connections sort of alive in the work. So I really wanted this sense of, yes, it's specific because it's sort of got certain details that tell you that it's related to fact, but then it's also, you don't know quite where it's specific to, so it could be Bosnia, or it could be you know, another Mexican border or something. It could be in other situations.
Rwanda, yeah. And just to come on to, I guess, another point about a certain form that you're using in your process, but at the same time one which I think has real implications for how we understand what you're talking about, is the fact that you use a form of you use text rather than rather than voice, or rather the voice is in the text. And again, I think that's another really good way in which you remind us that these things aren't absolutely synced. And I was again watching it this afternoon, thinking actually it's really really like the way that very beautiful scene that you make of her putting the flowers on the donkey, that's cut in the middle by a paragraph which is a narrative of them having to move again. Don't worry.
Don't worry.
Don't mind.
So the scene.
The
scene in the garden.
The scene in the garden.
Yeah.
And that great bit at the end when the hand, which is so Bressonian to me.
Oh yeah.
Her hand, his hand coming up like that, and there's so much drama in that detail, and desire, and other gendered implications, which I never got near to talking about, which are all there as well, of course. But I guess what I liked was the fact that it felt like you were writing a narrative about, and then they had to move to a safe house, and that's being read against images which are. It doesn't describe the images. It's not a subtitle. It's not an intertitle in the way that silent movies had. There's something about it being like a book, and I wrote this kind of a page-turning pace to it as we watch, like we're scanning it. You're opening up the text, but it's almost like we're scanning it with our eyes as it appears. So I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that decision.
About the text.
About the text.
Yeah, I mean, I guess right at the beginning, I thought it was going to be a spoken narrative, and then I realised I really needed the text to be played inside, to be heard inside somebody's head, inside the viewer's head. So I didn't want a text that performed, and so I guess so the interiority was kind of a key concern there, and then obviously I wrote the text. I put it into I took it from first person and put it into third person. I took it from the past and put it into the present. And then there was also lots of, several substitutions of where you've got an initial rather than a name, and things like that, which actually come from the memoir itself, because it was used in the memoir to protect the identities of the individuals. But then I sort of took it further, and groups of people are sort of called initials. So you've got Zs and you've got ACs. So which kind of come from Zs, come from actually the Hungarian for Jew, which is Zidos. But you don't need to know that.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a group of people, basically.
Who are being hounded and taunted. And that's the thing, I found how loud it was, even though there was no sound and no voice, in terms of the sense of the taunting, the demonisation that comes through in the text, and somehow seeing it, I don't know what anyone else felt, seeing it in black and white, echoes in your head. It's almost like you don't need to have someone speak it or perform it, if you like. And I don't know if that was something that was a decision or present with you at the beginning that you were thinking through, or was just something that emerged as you were working on?
Yeah, no, it very much emerged. But it was a big decision, because obviously it meant that the amount of text reduced And so there were parts of the story that had to go out. And there was simplification, some things that could be simplified as well. So just focusing on key elements, key scenes. So I mean, I was just thinking, and another thing that happened as I was making the film that was sort of changed it was that I shot 2/3 of it in Budapest. So and that wasn't a given at the beginning because so I was kind of thinking maybe because of the any space whatever approach, I was thinking, I could do it here, I could do it in France, But then actually I just realised that I wanted to do it and shoot the scenes in proximity to the places where the historical events happened. And that, did change things a lot, and it sort of animated certain aspects.
Can you speak a little bit more about that and how it changed things? Was it actually going there and walking the streets there, and what you were feeling from the fact being so close to writing this and thinking about this for a long time? And of course, as I know too well, it was trying to get out there during the pandemic and the lockdown, and all of the, I know Gabriella, you were involved in that too, but a lot of difficulties, a lot of barriers, which again are another reminder.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy shooting in Budapest under the regime that there is now, and we had public permissions that were pulled at the last minute because there was a mayoral election in Budapest, and Orban was worried about, things happening in his film shoots that might play against his interests. So, so the kind of material circumstances we were working with affected. But I guess what was interesting for me is that I realised that I got to know the city through the memoir. So the way that I sort of mapped my understanding of the city was through this memoir, and the memoir is really about place. So where he starts, up in the hills on the Buddha side, and then he's forced into this Yellow Star house, and then he's progressively forced to two other buildings in Budapest, but ending up in the sort of ghetto area of the Pest side. So I kind of got to know the city through that, and then often the bits where like say the account of where you're following them being marched down the hill, that's actually on the hill, so that's kind of made that kind of material connection, I think. And then there are other things like, so there was a use of sort of empty building sites, which was, in a way, I feel like Budapest is marked by these sites where there is nothing. And they're used as parking lots. And some of those sites seem to me to be sites where, a Yellow Star house had been, or there being some historical thing happened that was depicted in the memoir. And so it's sort of almost the gaps in the building, the line of buildings, was that sort of connected to the kind of gaps in history, and this attempt, by the Hungarian government right now to sort of rewrite the history. So the kind of deliberate gaps as well as the kind of circumstantial ones. So we sort of ended up using one of those for the kind of darkest moment, which is when they are in this ghetto house, and it feels like they are, that it's going to be the end, that they can't escape. So, yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, going there, even if it's not something you expected to do, really brought another very palpable sense of that pastime into the present again, in a way that you really echo in the film. And I think, I don't know, I feel like you can feel that when you've got, in the shot, it's at a diagonal of the donkey's feet coming along that stretch of pavement there. It feels very powerful. And, Bresson is there, that sense of the close-up shot. but you used it as a way. I think you've gone beyond maybe what his use of a close-up, in the sense that what you've brought to it and added to it is that continued being forced on the move, being watched, being taunted, all of that. You can feel that in the movement of its feet.
Yeah, and I think practically to do that, and to do that in other places might have been more difficult, but in Budapest, because it's rather set up for shooting, so it was, I was able to do that there. So, but yeah, that sense of momentum and being pushed from one place to another by no choice of your own was important. So, yeah.
Yeah, so, I wanted to ask about how some of you work with these processes, and I guess we've looked at quite a bit of that. What about the use of sound and music? I feel I should be saying this when Schubert's playing again, but that is a very direct quote from the film, but one that I think you use very carefully in your film, so maybe you might like to say a little bit about that.
Well, I think, the sound is kind of like, quite, in a way the sound kind of helps tie things up between the picture and the text, but then it is a quotation from the Schubert, because that's from the Bresson, but then obviously you've also got stereo lamp, in fact, at the end, which, so there's that kind of, that was a kind of
contemporary-ish, I guess you could say. Maybe contemporary for us, but certainly not for Esme.
Yeah. So, I just sort of used it because Bresson had it there, and obviously it talks about a sort of innocence somehow, and it talks about the animal, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the animal as the symbolic quality of the donkey in Bresson's film, but also in how I'm using the donkey. So this kind of image of gentleness and innocence and which so I guess it's key.
Yeah, and it's almost like that use of a kind of a signature. For the donkey in that way, and I think it's used I can't remember the last shot of Olisar Balthasar, isn't it? Where the donkey dies in the field, isn't it?
Yeah,
among the sheep. Anyone remembers that? So it's sort of a sadness to it.
Yeah.
So that's just to bring on to, I guess, my last question, because I know that others will have lots. Was around. The other aspects. We've got your photograph here, and I wondered if you wanted to maybe talk about the connection between the book and the Petite Anne, if I'm saying that.
Oh yeah.
If that would be something interesting for people to know more about.
Yeah, so the book is just a prototype, so we're going to make a sort of litho printed book, but so that's the prototype out there, but it refers to this Jacques Prévert film and book called Bim the Petite Anne, and it's also a story about a donkey being mistreated, but it's very much a story for children. So I did have the idea of the children's book in my mind, and I think the memoir, the family memoir, was sort of written for children as well. We're written for the young people of the family. So it was a kind of really helpful reference. And then just to say something about these photographs. So this one, it's actually March 2017, and so it was this piece of Holocaust denial graffiti, which was on the towpath. In sort of Richmond, and which said the Holocaust is a lie. Google 6 million lies. So I just kind of wanted to put something in the present, and the image kind of is actually an image of what it's like looking at that scene through a 5:4 camera. So you have the grid that comes from the ground glass, which is like a viewfinder on the back of the 5:4 camera, and then the text just describes this encounter with this graffiti. And then the two pairs of images back there actually are of the birthplace of Raoul Wallenberg. So Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish diplomat who went to Budapest in 1944 and issued fake Swedish passports and set up safe houses and saved over 20,000 people that way. So there's the kind of relationship, tangential relationship, the subject of the film.
Because the film was showing at the Imperial War Museum last week or week before last. And you've also shown it, and the photographs most recently back in Budapest.
Yes, so it's just open.
And I haven't heard how that went.
Yeah.
I bet that would be really interesting to know what the audiences there felt about it. Do you see this as a kind of, as a sort of, that the photographs in the book are all part of the same work with the film? You would show them all together, or the book would be something which would be published?
Yeah, the book is kind of like another iteration of the film, and the photographs are, they each have their own thing. So I think the film can be shown in other contexts.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to open up to, I'm sure, questions, and if everybody's feeling like they need a minute to think about what they want to ask, we can carry on talking a bit. But did anyone like to start? Anything? Or it doesn't need to be a question, it can be...
Just, you mentioned that the scene with the street was the actual street.
Yes,
or more or less.
More or less, sort of adjacent.
And the scene with the actual field, is that in Budapest as well, or is that somewhere else?
No,
the field.
So the opening bits were actually in London.
Okay.
So so the opening bits were actually in Ham. So
Not so far from there.
No, not so far. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
So.
Andrea.
So obviously we've talked a little bit about the film, and I felt it quite intensely, and I felt it even more intensely now you were talking about it. It was really interesting how some of the things, and especially with the sector, is really haunting. And I was thinking something about the text that you said that you see when you're saying that you actually feel it in you, and I was thinking that your choice of having the text being unfolded on the screen rather than being presented with a block of text, but having it slowly following and dictating, in a sense, how we're going to be feeling it. Because it's not about reading it, you can read much faster than this, but it's about stopping and I don't know, I almost felt some deliberate pauses, probably my imagination, but some pauses there that, so those that's an extraordinary thing. But I just wanted to focus on something else. And you already talked a little bit about the donkey, and I was really interested in the donkey, because you kind of seem to be saying that it's a symbol of innocence. But I wonder whether so each viewer can view it, right, in different ways, and I really would love to see it not just as a symbol, but as an animal.
Oh yeah, no, it is an animal as well.
Right.
Yeah,
but in the sense that it's also, of course, it is an animal. Yes.
That's what I approached it. I guess I understand what you're saying, and I'm saying that I did think about it in those terms. But to carry on.
But as an animal, there's also kind of there's a post-human moment, so many post-human moments in this film, and I was really struck by what you said just now, that the donkey field no longer has any donkeys, of course, and who knows whether they did have any. It's this kind of the proverbial beast of burden that is now completely absent. And in a sense, this is, again, we're going into metaphors, but this is exactly, the planetary connection between the human and the non-human. And like to it seemed to me that there are these two huge categories playing out there. So the Jew together with the animal, together with everything that it's not considered human in a very traditional sense of the human. And on the other hand, what we want to believe is human. But that moment, for example, that moment of desire, I think we all were really touched when the two hands were coming closer. To me, that was also, because of the disembodied almost aspect of it, I thought that was also a really beautiful animal moment rather than just a beautiful human moment. Am I reading too much on this?
No, I mean, I think that there's 2 points where there's kind of contact, kind of gendered contact in the film, which actually, one is there with the 2 hands on the bench, and the other is in the bar where the girl pushes him away. And I suppose I've been thinking about that and been thinking about, and that the one in the bar actually comes adjacent to a description of what happened to Jay's friend and how they pulled his pants down and saw that he was a Zed and shot him, and which is, from the account. And, obviously it's a very uncomfortable juxtaposition to make. And I think it's sort of talking about intimacy of that racial violence, just how intimate it is, and how invasive it is, and physical, and which is obvious, but I guess that's where it sort of comes from. But yeah, it's not comfortable. It's not very easy to talk about.
And I suppose in a way, the fact that you have those moments of almost tenderness and intimacy, but we also see it playing out in her how she strokes and cares for the donkey, and then you kind of contrast that to when he picks up the bottle and throws it in there, and these I guess different sorts of performances or gestures, perhaps, or what was a way to explore that, exactly what you're saying, the kind of intimacy in the violence.
Yeah, which doesn't, but that's just to talk about the kind of horror of it in a way. It's a way to animate the realness. Yes.
I mean, one thing I really felt very strongly, I don't know if this is something you're picking up, was the sense that you were dealing with something unspeakable and finding ways to there's so much in the text, but also in the images too, about silence, about noise. It seems that it's really sensitized the idea of speaking or not speaking, or taunting, shouting names, and we know that so much that process of demonization is such a key part of forms of persecution, whether at this point in Budapest or now elsewhere, or now in the UK in this way too. So that felt like something that, I know that in your family history that was also something that's taken a long time to come out, and this perhaps is your way to find a way to it.
Yeah.
And to find a way to, in a sense, to the fact it couldn't be spoken as much as that it's a story that you feel you want to tell in some way. You know what I mean?
But
anyway, anyway, more questions, please. We have spent a long time over the last few years talking about this together, haven't we? And so it's so great to see it here. I mean, I know I'm not the only one feeling that. Anyone else? No,
maybe covered it too thoroughly.
Yeah, I'm getting a bit emotional now thinking about it, so please help me out. Ask the questions.
But maybe you can continue the conversation in a more informal way.
Yeah.
We might find it easier to ask questions differently. So thank you immensely to both of you.